He was thrown out of the car dealership with disdain, solely because of the color of his skin, as if success and wealth held no value in a world ruled by racism. He stood outside, humiliated and enraged, but instead of seeking revenge, he chose a path that shook not only the city, but the entire society. The next day, he returned, not as a customer, but as a hero who turned his money into a symbol of struggle and justice. His actions stunned even the most cynical onlookers, but to truly understand, we must return to the beginning. Jonathan Harris confidently walked into the spacious, gleaming showroom. His steps were assured and his gaze focused. He had been eyeing a new car for some time, one he was finally ready to buy. For Jonathan, this purchase was more than just another luxury item. It was a symbol of his hard work, his achievements, and the obstacles he had overcome. However, the atmosphere shifted the moment he entered. The staff says briefly scanned his figure. The manager, standing near the entrance, glanced at him with evident contempt. It was the same look Jonathan had encountered many times in his life, a swift, judgmental, and disdainful gaze. It was as if all the success and achievements he had worked so hard for dissolved in that one look. The manager took a step forward, and, without waiting for Jonathan to speak, coldly said, "Sorry, but we don't cater to your kind here." Jonathan was taken aback for a second, but quickly regained his composure. "I'm not here to look around. I'm ready to buy a car with cash," he responded calmly, trying to maintain his dignity. The manager didn't even bother to hide his disdain. "Don't waste my time. You're not our customer," he practically hissed, clearly eager to end the conversation. With a single gesture, he pointed Jonathan to the exit. Jonathan felt his anger boiling inside, but kept this restraint. He had faced this kind of treatment before, but it hurt just as much every time. "You're making a big mistake," Jonathan quietly said, turning and slowly walking toward the exit. His pride was wounded, but something inside told him that this wasn't the end of the story. The showroom doors closed behind him, leaving a bitter taste of humiliation in the air. Jonathan walked slowly down the street, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It was jarring to encounter that raw racism once again, something that had shadowed him his entire life, yet which he had long learned to suppress. But in that moment, when he expected respect and equal treatment based on his status, he was once more confronted with contempt solely because of the color of his skin. He stopped at a nearby bench and sat down, trying to calm the anger bubbling inside him. For a moment, a sense of defeat washed over him. All his accomplishments, business successes, and societal respect seemed insignificant in the face of this deeply rooted system of prejudice. Jonathan began to wonder, could he really overcome this force that seemed so entrenched in society? Doubt started to creep in. Memories from his childhood and youth flooded back, times when he faced insults, disregard, and inequality at every turn. He had always fought against it, but today's humiliation cut particularly deep. Maybe he should just accept it? Move on and ignore such moments as he had done before? These thoughts swirled in his mind, making him feel powerless against the immense system he was facing. But something inside wouldn't let him give up. The deep inner strength he had gained over years of struggle and perseverance wouldn't allow him to lower his hands in defeat. He knew that this incident couldn't just pass unnoticed, that he couldn't let this system continue to demean him and others like him. An idea began to form in his mind, one that would not only restore his sense of dignity, but also send a powerful message to society. As Jonathan rose from the bench and headed home, he already knew that his response would be powerful and well thought out. Once home, Jonathan sat quietly for a long time, reflecting on what had happened. He replayed moments of racial discrimination in his mind. Each incident had left its mark, but the humiliation at the dealership today was the last straw. At that moment, Jonathan felt a resolve growing within him that he had never felt before. He remembered his father's words, who always said that justice isn't something to wait for, but to strive for. His father had been a simple worker, building houses all his life, yet he believed in the power of knowledge and perseverance. "You must fight not with fists, but with your mind," he would say. These words now resonated deeply within Jonathan's heart. He realized that his revenge wouldn't be a mere burst of anger or a desire to hurt those who had wronged him. No, his actions had to become a symbol that dignity isn't bought or defined by money, and that strength lies in supporting and standing in solidarity with those who face similar injustices. Jonathan knew he had all the necessary resources to do something truly significant. He didn't just want to buy a car to prove his financial worth. His goal had changed. He was set on something bigger, a deed that would lift him above the situation, turning insult into triumph. Focused on his idea, Jonathan began planning his next step. He called several of his business partners and discussed potential actions. This time, his response to discrimination would be not just strong but grand, with a message for all those who had ever faced prejudice and inequality. The idea became clearer in his mind. He wouldn't just buy one car. He would purchase all the most expensive cars in that dealership. But instead of keeping them for himself, he would do something more symbolic. He would give them to those in need. Jonathan was confident that this would be a powerful response to the system that had tried to demean him. The next day, Jonathan began to put his plan into action. He couldn't wait to see it come to life, but he knew everything had to be perfectly organized. He consulted financial advisors and lawyers to ensure the car purchases went smoothly through a few trusted intermediaries. His goal wasn't just to buy the cars, but to do so without anyone at the dealership realizing that the man they had humiliated the previous day was behind it. The preparations took time and required careful coordination. Jonathan enlisted a few close friends and partners who were willing to help. Each was given instructions on which cars to purchase and how to handle the transactions without raising suspicion. He chose the most luxurious and expensive models in the showroom, knowing that this would create an even greater impact. All the cars were to become symbols of his triumph over the system. At the same time, Jonathan contacted local charitable organizations that helped the homeless. He explained his plan and arranged for the cars to be given to those in genuine need. This wasn't just charity, it was a gesture meant to show that human dignity isn't determined by money and that even those whom society rejects can receive something significant and valuable. Jonathan thought through every detail. He knew his actions would generate significant public attention. But for him, it wasn't just about restoring his dignity. It was about sending a message to everyone that racism and prejudice could be overcome. Not with force, but with thoughtful actions that benefit society. When everything was ready, he set a precise time and date for his trusted individuals to visit the dealership and make the purchases. Jonathan felt that this moment would be pivotal, not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt oppressed or demeaned because of the color of their skin. The next morning, Jonathan watched from afar. His trusted partners, successful, influential people whom the dealership hadn't expected to see, quietly entered one by one and began purchasing the most expensive cars. Luxurious sports cars and high-end sedans quickly disappeared from the showroom, and with each transaction, the dealership staff became more flustered and anxious. Finally, when the time came, Jonathan appeared at the dealership's door. His presence caused immediate discomfort among the staff. The manager, who had rudely dismissed him the day before, noticeably paled. He couldn't hide his shock upon realizing that the man he had so contemptuously thrown out had not only returned but now controlled everything happening in the showroom. Jonathan calmly walked up to the counter where the documents for the last car, not yet purchased by his trusted partners, were lying. He looked around the now nearly empty showroom and turned to the manager, who was struggling to conceal his anxiety. The dealership had lost nearly all its premium cars in a matter of hours, and the manager realized he had not only lost customers but also cost this company a massive amount of money. "Remember me?" Jonathan asked, his voice calm but with a steel edge. The manager didn't know what to say. He tried to stammer something, but Jonathan stopped him. "Yesterday, you threw me out because you thought I wasn't worthy of being your customer because of my skin color. Today, I'm taking all your best cars, but not for myself." The manager froze, awaiting what would come next. He looked at Jonathan with evident unease, unsure of how this would end. The customers who had been going about their business were now watching in surprise, realizing they were witnessing something far greater than a mere financial transaction. Jonathan raised his hands to draw the attention of everyone in the dealership. His confidence was undeniable, and his calm demeanor lent the situation a sense of gravity. Everyone stood still, waiting for his next words, including the manager, who couldn't hide his growing fear. "All desiccers," Jonathan began, gesturing towards the last few purchases. "I'm not buying them for myself. I'm giving them to those who truly need them." A silence fell over the showroom. The manager and the other employees couldn't believe what they were hearing. The customers, who had been preoccupied moments before, were now fully engrossed in what was happening. These vehicles, which you see as symbols of status and privilege, will today become symbols of justice. They'll be given to those whom society rejects, those considered unworthy, just as you thought I was unworthy yesterday. His words were clear and powerful. There wasn't a trace of anger in his tone, only certainty and determination. At that moment, the dealership doors opened, and several representatives from local charitable organizations that supported the homeless walked in. Behind them followed local media cameras. The situation was unfolding rapidly, drawing the attention of journalists, who immediately realized they were witnessing an extraordinary event. The dealership manager stood motionless as, his face a mixture of confusion and fear of what was about to happen. He was beginning to realize that his actions shadowed to massive reputational damage for the company, and this was only the beginning. Jonathan, however, remained calm, knowing that his deed would go down in history as an example of turning humiliation into triumph. "Today, the Zakars will go to the streets, to those who truly need them," Jonathan continued. "Let this serve as a reminder to everyone that a person's dignity is not measured by the color of their skin or the amount of money in their pocket." His speech was met with applause from the gathered crowd, and even the dealership employees began to realize that they were witnessing something significant. The manager attempted to say something, but the words got caught in his throat. Jonathan simply looked at him and said, "Now you understand that your bias has cost you far more than you ever imagined. This isn't about money, it's about justice." In the hours following the event, Jonathan's story spread at incredible speed. Journalists began airing the story live, social media exploded with news of Jonathan's actions, and the video of his speech to the dealership staff and charity representatives quickly got millions of views. People across the country saw his deed as a powerful symbol of the fight against racism and inequality. Jonathan, who had been humiliated and rejected that day, had now become a hero and inspiration for thousands, if not millions, of people. Comments under the videos and posts on social media expressed admiration and support for his actions. To many, he became an example of how to combat prejudice without resorting to aggression, but by doing something meaningful and beneficial for society. Human rights organizations and anti-racist movements embraced this story as proof that change was possible if one refused to remain silent and took action. The homeless individuals who received the cars spoke gratefully about how this wasn't just a vehicle for them. It was an opportunity to find work, to move freely about the city, and to feel part of society once again. Jonathan's gesture gave them not just cars but hope. Meanwhile, the dealership found itself at the center of a major scandal. The video of Jonathan's humiliation and the events that followed exposed the flaws and biases within its staff. The company attempted to defend itself, claiming that it was the mistake of one employee and that they did not share his views. However, public opinion had already been shaped. People demanded changes, and many refused to support a business that allowed such discrimination. For Jonathan, this was more than just a personal victory. It was proof that actions could change the world around him. He saw how his example inspired others to stand up for their rights and not fear speaking out against injustice. But most importantly, he demonstrated that even in the most degrading situations, there is a way to turn pain and humiliation into a force that benefits not only oneself, but those who need it most. With each passing hour, Jonathan's story gained more traction. He was invited to talk shows, written about in newspapers, and local charities began receiving additional donations from people inspired by his actions. Jonathan knew that this resonance was only the beginning of something bigger. Several days passed after the event, and its effects were fully felt. The dealership, which had tried to suppress the scandal, now found itself in the center of public condemnation. Due to overwhelming public pressure and multiple customer boycotts, the company was forced to take action. The manager who had humiliated Jonathan was publicly fired, and the dealership owners began reviewing their customer policies. The incident served as a harsh lesson that dismissive treatment of people based on racial prejudice was not only moral but also ruinous for business. However, for Jonathan, the situation had long surpassed the bounds of a single dealership. His actions had become a symbol of the fight for equality, and his name became associated with victory over prejudice. His phone never stopped ringing. Journalists, activists, and everyday people wanted to express their support. But for Jonathan, the most important thing was that his deed had inspired many others to take action. The homeless individuals to whom he gave the cars were beginning a new chapter in their lives. For many, it marked the start of breaking out of difficult circumstances. One of them, Jacob, who had lived on the streets for a long time, got a job as a driver thanks to the car Jonathan gave him. He said in an interview that the gesture changed his life and gave him a second chance. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued his charitable work. He decided to use the attention this story had attracted to support various social initiatives. His foundation received a huge influx of donations, and he began actively working with organizations that fought for the rights of the oppressed and helped those in need. But for Jonathan, the real reward wasn't fame or public recognition. His greatest victory was knowing that he had not only defended his dignity but also done something meaningful for society. He had shown that even in the most humiliating situations, there is a way to turn them into a force that changes lives for the better. Jonathan's story became an example for many, an example of how pain and humiliation can be turned into positive change. He proved that kindness, support, and determination can overcome any prejudice and injustice, and most importantly, he inspired others to fight for their rights and dignity.